Hi, everybody. We are going to share about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on early childhood education. My name is Catherine Carruthers.
My name is Jocelyn Chan.
My name is Julian Sumadabila.
And my name is Genesis Sunoco.
So first, I'm just going to give a little overview of our presentation. I'm going to briefly describe about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has had some big effects on children, families, and caregivers. And then we're going to talk about specifics with children, families, and caregivers. And then we will share some resources and our brochure and our references. So why did we select this topic? As I'm sure you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all of our lives in pretty big ways, and it's had an especially profound impact on children and children with disabilities and their families specifically. It's created a need for new learning methods and new communication methods, and it's had some really controversial and challenging impacts on families. So this respiratory virus has infected more than 35 million individuals worldwide. It's disrupted the school systems, it's created school closures, it's caused problems with accessibility to appointments and therapies, and also just an overall lack of social services and support that can be from family members, caregivers, teachers, etc. So this is clearly important, and it hasn't really been researched that much because it is so new. So when we started researching, we noticed that there was a need, or there was many needs, because of all of the implications of the pandemic. And so we wanted to look into kind of what people have found is helping and what can be done to mitigate all of the effects that the pandemic is having. So here are some testimonials, I believe, from people in our own communities. We asked around and got some of these answers. So one of Genesis's students was telling her that he can't sit still and he misses his friends. That child's parents also said that COVID has made it challenging for all of us, since we have to learn and adapt to a new routine that sometimes isn't always perfect and is consistently changing. And then one of my telecare friends said that virtual telecare has offered great insights into the natural home environment, but it has also made it extremely difficult to offer expertise through a screen. So overall, it's just been very challenging for children, families, and ECE professionals. And Jocelyn, I believe, Genesis is going to share about how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected children.
So the pandemic has affected children and their daily routines, such as their therapies, appointments, life skills, even social skills, and it has given accessibility challenges such as lack of parent support, less individual support from professionals and teachers, just like what Catherine just said. And technology barrier is another one, since some students may not have Wi-Fi at home or just have a difficulty with getting that connection. And again, social skills and friendship, we all know how important it is to build that social and interaction. And without that, it just makes it another barrier for children to overcome later on. Some resources that we've come up throughout our articles is 1, having a conversation about COVID-19, is 2, creating structure in a home setting, 3, maintaining school and community relationships, 4, connecting with others through shared interest, and 5, scheduling appointments for online therapy and setting a schedule using visual aid for communication, especially when working with students with special needs. And more information will be given in the next slide. So visual aid support, as we all know how important it is to communicate about these things. It gives the children an opportunity to feel entitled about their day by giving them choices, knowing what to expect, and build their communication skills. It provides an opportunity for children to learn, problem solve, and to reduce challenging behaviors at home or in another environment. And according to one of the articles, there were 6 different ways of how we could communicate using visual support. One is what we all know is a regular schedule routine, but several that have that were that were surprise to us was the contingency map and the social narrative and symbol exchange, which social narrative is where it allows the child to know the outcome of of a appropriate behavior, social values, or expectations. And the contingency map is the learning effect of certain choices. So in the next slide, you'll see examples of what I mean by this. So social narrative is something that you could also use to describe what COVID-19 is, especially using visual support. As you could tell, when someone gets angry, it makes mom upset. So that's one of the examples. And you could always change up the social narrative just so the child knows what will happen if it leads to this behavior or if it leads to a positive behavior, which is also part of the contingency map, which allows the child to see, the red is, let's not do this. If not, this is a consequence. And the green is, if you do this correctly, there is a reward at the end. And symbol exchange is something that we all also know, where the child asks what they need, what they want, and they could request it throughout the day. And this is the things that what we want and what our schedule is. And Julian will now talk about how the impact has affected families and or caregivers.
So the COVID-19 pandemic also had a great effect on the families and caregivers of young children. Because of the shelter-in-place orders, many services and like school education systems have been either placed on hold or shifted to virtual means. The change in the services has caused many concerns over like potential regression in development or stress over the lack of support that caregivers and families may use to rely on. This was the virtual services at the time was the only alternative to the in-person therapies and classes. And in the current articles touching on the mental health of families and caregivers of young children and young children with special needs in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it stated that one of the most common issues that families faced while partaking in virtual services was mostly the inability to keep a young child with any type of special need or any kind of need to attend to a computer for a period of time without exhibiting any challenging behaviors or just lack of interest. In addition, many families felt the stresses of external issues such as finances or changes in employment. In addition, like many of the activities or like the self-care routines that families and caregivers of young children would typically rely on outside of the home were either placed on hold or changed due to the pandemic, which can cause some negative like mental health effects on the families because they may find it difficult to navigate through all the changes and what they would typically use to help with their mental health may not be available or accessible in this pandemic. However, in some of the articles that we've read, silver lining testimonials were also recorded just to study the positive impacts and experiences that came out of this pandemic as well. And the most common experiences included like being able to spend more time together, as well as families and parents who would typically be working. They're able to see more of and witness more of their child's accomplishments as they spend more time at home together. Some resources and tips for families and caregivers who are kind of navigating through this pandemic is to create routines with the families to establish a sense of normalcy and structure within the household. Also to, just like Genesis said, visual or utilize any picture visual schedule to help the child really visualize and understand what to expect in the home routine. Maintain good habits throughout the day, and that could include healthy diet, good sleeping habits, some safe exercise routines such as outdoor walks or any kind of activity while we can social distance. practice mindfulness and directing attention to the current moment for anytime families and caregivers may need that. And then also consider some community and government funded programs to assist families who may be facing some financial or economic hardships. And for families who need it, also consider some online community support groups or counseling who may need, for the families who may need the mental health support. And now Jocelyn will talk about how ECE professionals have been affected by the pandemic.
So there are various ways that ECE professionals have been affected by the pandemic. A few that we have identified includes the first one, which is transition from traditional to online learning. So basically, how can we support children and families virtually while navigating the systems ourselves? And how can we ensure that they have the resources to learn and develop in a healthy and holistic way? The second one is limited supports from school administrators. So there is basically a lack of communication, guidance, and resources for ECE professionals during this time. The third one is individuals are being laid off due to the school closures. As you guys may know, the pandemic has forced a lot of schools to close down. And because of this, a lot of professionals have been unemployed and have no income. So how can we ensure that they have this income for daily survival? The fourth one is limited essential supplies to operate center and family child cares. So since supplies are very limited and running out, how can we ensure that we have these daily essentials to make sure that our environment is clean, safe, and sanitized for the children and families that we serve? And last but not least, the physical, healthy, and safety of these individuals. So how are we ensuring that the systems we have in place make sure that not ourselves, but also children, families, and our employees are safe in this environment to serve? Moving on, I'm going to be talking about the 5 phases of creating an efficient virtual learning for staff, student, teachers, and educators. So the first one is implementing and curriculum ahead of time. So making sure that you have the sufficient time and resources to create and also implement your curriculum in your classrooms. The second one is creating a teacher-student connections. So building this relationship by either establishing a positive classroom environment, learning about one another, and also making sure that we ourselves are available for the students. The third one is giving students supports. So you can either give support to your students through encouragements, motivation, or modeling. The fourth one is parent-teacher connections. So you can use preferred modes of communications of the parents and caregivers, such as text, message, calling, or emailing, just ensuring that this partnership is still there. Last but not least, just setting a time for reflection. So creating the space to reflect on your teaching, your experience with families, and also yourself as an individual. So making sure that your mental health is good before serving others. So moving on, I'm going to be talking about some resources for ECE professionals' mental health and well-being. So there were 4 that were identified in the articles that we researched. The first one is having professional development programs. The second one is mindfulness-based caregiving interventions. The third one is early childhood mental health consultation. And the fourth one is reflective supervision and consultation. The next slide also includes additional resources for children, families, and professionals. It includes emotional, physical, parent, housing, food, and unemployment supports. So if you guys do need any of these resources, feel free to look into the websites for further information. And now for the next slide, Catherine will conclude our presentation with just a brief conclusion.
Well, thank you everybody for listening to our presentation. We really wanted this information to be useful. So hopefully the research that we did helped kind of bridge the gap between the rising needs and then some resources. So hopefully you can use some of the information you learned to talk to your families or your children or yourself. And then you can also use our brochure, which is on the next slide, which has kind of the information in a concise format for you. So on behalf of everybody on my project team, thank you so much for listening and have a nice break.